Mary Bell was a child who knew nothing but rejection and neglect. Her mother, who was only 16 years old at her birth, told the doctors to take that thing away from me upon seeing her daughter. Her mother repeatedly abused her and wanted to give her away on several occasions. Pain and death became major parts of Mary's young life as she witnessed her 5-year-old friend get run over by a bus. All of these unfortunate events shaped Mary into a strange, introverted child who became obsessed with violence. But despite all this, nobody could predict the depravity of her psyche at only 10 years old. Welcome to History's Biggest Villains. Mary Bell was born on May 26, 1957 in Northumberland, England, to a 16-year-old sex worker named Betty McCricket. Mary was an unwanted and neglected child. According to her aunt Isa, within minutes of Mary's birth, her mother had berated hospital staff trying to place her daughter in her arms, shouting, "Take that thing away from me." Mary frequently suffered injuries and household accidents while alone with her mother, which led her family to believe that either her mother was deliberately negligent or intentionally trying to harm or kill her daughter. On one occasion in about 1960, Betty dropped her daughter from a first-floor window. She gave her daughter sleeping pills. She is also known to have once sold Mary to a mentally unstable woman who was unable to have children of her own, resulting in her older sister Catherine having to travel alone across Newcastle to reclaim Mary from the woman and return the child to her mother's home on White House Road. According to later accounts given by Mary herself, her mother began to use her for sex work when she was just 4, though this remains uncorroborated by other family members. Both at home and at school, Mary showed numerous signs of disturbed and unpredictable behavior, including sudden mood swings and chronic bedwetting. She frequently fought with other children, both boys and girls, and attempted to strangle and suffocate her classmates on several occasions. On one occasion, she shoved sand in the mouth of another girl. This violent behavior made many children reluctant to socialize with Mary, who frequently spent her free time with Norma Joyce Bell, the 13-year-old daughter of a next-door neighbor. Although the girls shared the last name, they weren't related. On Saturday, May 11th, 1968, a 3-year-old boy was discovered wandering dazed and bleeding in the vicinity of St. Margaret's Road. He told police he was playing with Mary and Norma Bell atop a disused air raid shelter when he was pushed 7 feet from the floor to the ground, leaving a deep gash in his head. He was unsure of which one of the girls had actually pushed him. That same evening, the parents of 3 small girls contacted police to complain that both Mary and Norma had attempted to strangle their children as they played in a sandpit. That evening, both girls were interviewed about these incidents. Both girls denied any culpability for the air raid shelter incident, claiming they simply discovered the boy bleeding heavily from a head wound after he had fallen. Further questioned about the attempted strangulation of the 3 young girls, Mary denied any knowledge of the incident. However, later on, Norma admitted Mary had tried to throttle each of the girls, stating, "Mary went to one of the girls and said, 'What happens if you choke someone? Do they die?' Then Mary put both hands around the girl's throat and squeezed. The girl started to go purple. I told Mary to stop, but she wouldn't. Then she put her hands around Pauline's throat and she started going purple as well. Another girl, Susan Cornish, came up and Mary did the same thing to her. Police notified the local authority of the incidents and of Mary's violent nature, but due to their age, both girls were only given a warning." In the 1960s, Newcastle upon Tyne was in the midst of a significant urban renewal project. Many inner boroughs of the city saw Victorian-era slums demolished so that modern houses and flats could be constructed, although several families still lived in these old buildings marked for demolition as they awaited rehousing by the council. Local children frequently played in or close to the demolished houses and upon the rubble-filled areas and of land raised and partially cleared by contractors. One of these locations was a large expanse of waste ground located close to a railway line known as the Tin Lizzie. The street, which ran parallel to this expanse of waste ground, was St. Margaret's Road. On May 25, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Bell strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in an upstairs bedroom of a derelict house located on 85 St. Margaret's Road. Brown's body was discovered by 3 children at approximately 3:30 p.m. He was lying on his back with his arms stretched above his head. Aside from specks of blood and foam around his mouth, no signs of violence were visible upon his body. A local workman named John Hall soon arrived on the scene, and he tried to perform CPR to no avail. As he attempted CPR, 2 local girls, Mary Bell and her friend Norma, arrived at the doorway to the bedroom. They would quickly shoot out of the house. 2 knocked on the door of Martin's aunt, Rita Findley, and informed her, One of your sister's children has just had an accident. We think it's Martin, but we can't tell because there's blood all over him. The following day, Dr. Bernard Knight conducted an autopsy on the body of Martin Brown. He was unable to find any signs of violence on the child's body, and thus was unable to determine the cause of death. On Mary's 11th birthday, the 26th, she and Norma broke into and vandalized a nursery at nearby Woodland Crescent. The two entered the premises by peeling tiles off the slate roof. They tore books, upturned desks, and smeared ink and poster paints about the property before escaping. The following day, staff discovered the break-in and vandalism and immediately notified the police, who also discovered 4 separate notes that claimed responsibility for Martin Brown's murder. One of these notes stated, "I murder so that I may come back." Another read, "We did murder Martin Brown. Fuck off, you bastard." A third note simply read, "Fuck off, we murder. Watch out, Fanny and faggot." This is what they're saying in the notes. This is what they're saying in the notes. The final note was the most complex, reading, "You are mice. Why? Because we murdered Martin. Go Brown. You beat. Look out. There are murders about by Fanny and old faggot you screws." What is this? The police dismissed this incident as a childish prank. 2 days later, on May 29th, shortly before the funeral of Martin Brown, in a game of chicken, both girls called upon the house of his mother, June, asking to see her son. When June Brown replied that they couldn't see her son because he was dead, Mary replied, "Oh, I know he's dead. I just want to see him in his coffin." Oh my God. Jesus Christ, you are a savage. On the afternoon of July 31st, 1968, a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe was last seen by his parents in the street outside his house playing with one of his siblings, the family dog, Mary Bell, and Norma Bell. When he didn't return home later that afternoon, concerned relatives and neighbors searched the streets without success. At 11:10 p.m., a search party discovered Brian's body between 2 large concrete blocks upon the Tin Lizzie. The first policeman to arrive at the scene observed that a deliberate but feeble attempt had been made to conceal the body, which was covered in clumps of grass and weeds. His lips were blue and several bruises and scratches were evident upon his neck. A pair of broken scissors lay close to his feet. The coroner concluded that Brian had died from strangulation and that he had been dead up to 7 hours before they discovered his body. The killer had squeezed Brian's nostrils closed with one hand as they gripped his throat with the other. Numerous puncture wounds had been inflicted to the child's legs before death. Sections of his hair were cut from his head. His genitals had been partially mutilated, and a crude attempt had been made to carve the initial M into his stomach. The relatively small amount of force used to murder the child led the coroner to believe the killer was another child. Numerous gray and maroon fibers were discovered upon Brian's clothing and shoes. These fibers didn't source from any clothing within the Howe household and had been transferred to the child by this killer. The discovery of Brian Howe's body sparked a large-scale manhunt. Over 100 detectives from across Northumberland were assigned to the investigation, and more than 1,200 children had been questioned in regard to their whereabouts by August 2nd. 2 children questioned by detectives on August 1st were Mary Bell and Norma Bell, who had been seen playing with Brian shortly before he was believed to have died. Although both girls were evasive in their initial statements, they admitted to playing with Brian on the date of his death, but denied having seen him after lunch. Mary said she remembered seeing an 8-year-old local boy playing with Brian on the afternoon of July 31st, and that she had also seen him hitting the child. Furthermore, she stated that she also remembered that the boy had been covered in grass and weeds as if he had been rolling in a field, and that he had in his possession a small pair of scissors. How convenient. Mary then explained, "I saw him trying to cut a cat's tail off with the scissors, but there was something wrong with him. One leg was broken or bent." This self-incriminating statement convinced Detective Chief Inspector James Dobson that Mary was the actual killer, as only the police knew about the broken scissors found at the crime scene. In addition, the boy she named was quickly questioned and was discovered to have been at Newcastle International Airport on the afternoon of July 31st, with numerous witnesses able to corroborate his parents' claims. On the afternoon of August 4th, the parents of Norma Bell contacted police, stating their daughter wished to confess what she knew about the death of Brian Howe. DCI Dobson arrived at their home, formally cautioned Norma, then asked what she knew. Norma then informed Dobson Mary had taken her to a spot on the Tin Lizzie, at which point she had been shown Brian's body. Mary had then demonstrated to her how she had strangled the child. According to Norma, Mary had confessed to her she had enjoyed strangling the child. before describing how she made the cuts to his stomach with a razor blade, which had been hidden at the crime scene, and the broken scissors. Mary then led police to the crime scene and revealed the location where the razor blade was hidden. A drawing Norma made of the wounds inflicted to the boy's abdomen precisely matched those described by the coroner. Mary Bell was visited at her home in the early hours of August 5th. On this occasion, she was notably defensive when confronted by the discrepancies in her previous statement, informing detectives, "You're trying to brainwash me. I will get a solicitor to get me out of this." This is an 11-year-old girl, by the way. Just think about how intelligent she is of criminal law. It's very intriguing. Later the same day, Norma was questioned again. On this occasion, she made a full statement in which she admitted being present when Mary had actually strangled Brian. According to Norma, when the trio were alone on the Tin Lizzie, Mary seemed to go all funny, pushing the child into the grass and attempting to strangle him before stating to her, "My hands are getting thick. Take over." She had then ran from the scene, leaving Mary alone with Brian. A forensic examination of clothing owned by both girls revealed the gray fibers discovered upon Brian's body were a precise match to a woolen dress owned by Mary. The maroon fibers upon the child's shoes were a precise match to a skirt owned by Norma. Furthermore, the same gray fibers had also been found on the body of Martin Brown. Brian Howe was buried in a local cemetery on August 7th, 1968, in a ceremony attended by over 200 people. According to DCI Dobson, Mary Bell stood outside the Howe household as the child's coffin was brought from the home at the beginning of the funeral procession. Dobson later stated, "She stood there, laughing and rubbing her hands. I thought, my God, I've got to bring her in. She'll do another one." Both girls were formally charged with the murder of Brian Howe at 8 p.m. that evening. In response to this charge, Mary replied, "That's all right by me." Norma burst into tears, simply proclaiming, I'll pay you back for this." Mary prepared a written statement in which she admitted to being present when Brian Howe was murdered, but insisting the murder had been committed by Norma. She also admitted she and Norma had broken into the Woodland Crescent nursery the day after the killing of Martin Brown, defacing the property before the two had written the 4 notes. Shortly after the arrest, both girls underwent psychological evaluations. The result of these tests revealed Norma was intellectually delayed and a submissive character who easily displayed emotion, whereas Mary was a bright yet cunning character prone to sudden mood swings. The 4 psychiatrists who examined Mary concluded that, although not suffering from a mental disorder, she suffered from a psychopathic personality disorder. In his official report, Dr. David Westbury concluded, Mary's social techniques are primitive and take the form of automatic denial, ingratiation, manipulation, complaining, bullying, flight, or violence. The trial of Mary Bell and Norma Bell for the murders of Martin Brown and Brian Howe took place on December 5th, 1968. Both girls were tried before Mr. Justice Ralph Cusack, and both pled not guilty to the charges. Against protests from both defense counsel on the first day of the trial, Cusack waived the defendants' right to anonymity on account of their age. As such, the media were allowed to publicize the names, ages, and photographs of both girls, who each sat alongside plainclothes female police officers in the center of the court, behind their legal representatives and within arm's reach of the families throughout the trial. On the 5th day of the trial, Norma testified in her own defense. She denied any culpability in the murder of either child, but admitted under cross-examination to having known Mary's propensity for violence and her history for attacking children, and that the two had discussed attacking and killing small children of both genders. When questioned by prosecutor Rudolph Lyons as to whether Mary had demonstrated to her how children could be killed, Norma nodded yes. She then conceded that as Mary had begun to attack and strangle Brian Howe, she had failed to alert a group of boys playing in the vicinity, stating that she had failed to do so as "I did not know what was going to happen in the first place." She had stopped hurting them for a bit when the boys were near the concrete blocks. When questioned as to her own role in the murder, she stated that she never touched the child. Following the conclusion of Norma's testimony on December 12th, Mary testified in her own defense. Her testimony lasted for almost 4 hours, concluding on December 13th, and was briefly adjourned on one occasion when she began crying into a policewoman's arms. She denied her co-defendant's accusations, insisting that although she had observed the body of Martin Brown on St. Margaret's Road, she herself had never harmed the child, and that she and Norma had later asked the boy's mother to view his body as the two were daring each other and one of us didn't want to be a chicken. Mary then conceded she had divulged to others her knowledge of Martin's death could get Norma put straight away. Questioned with regards to the death of Brian Howe, Mary claimed that Norma had been the individual that had strangled the child, as she herself was just standing and looking. "I couldn't move. It was as if some glue was pulling us down. Mary then alleged Norma had encouraged Brian to lie down if he wanted some sweets, telling him, "You gotta lie down for the lady to come with the sweets," before proceeding to strangle him with her bare hands as she herself unsuccessfully attempted to prevent the attack. Mary further stated she could determine the level of force Norma had exhibited because her fingertips and nails were going white, and again conceded she had failed to inform authorities of her knowledge of Norma's actions out of both fear and a misguided sense of loyalty. Norma's mother, Catherine, however, then testified that several months prior to the killing of Brian Howe, she and her husband had discovered Mary's attempt to strangle Norma's younger sister Susan, and that she had only released her grip on her daughter's throat after her husband had punched Mary in the shoulder. A child psychiatrist named Ian Fraser then testified that Norma's mental age was 8 years and 10 months, and that although her capacity of knowing right from wrong was limited, she was capable of appreciating the criminality of the acts she was accused of committing. The trial lasted 9 days. On December 17th, the jury retired to consider their verdict, and would deliberate for 3 hours before reaching their verdict. Mary Bell was cleared of murder, but convicted of the manslaughter of both boys on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Norma Bell was acquitted of all charges. Upon hearing the jury's verdicts, Norma clapped her hands in excitement, whereas Mary burst into tears as her mother and grandmother also wept. Passing sentence, the judge described Bell as a dangerous individual, adding that she poses a very grave risk to other children and that steps must be taken to protect the public from her. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, effectively an indefinite sentence of imprisonment. At the time of her manslaughter convictions, she was 11 years and 6 months, making her Britain's youngest female killer, a statistic that still remains to this day. Durham was initially detained at a Durham remand home before being transferred to a second remand home in South Norwood. She was then transferred to the Red Bank Secure Unit in early 1969, where she was the only female among 24 inmates. She would later claim that she was sexually abused by a member of the staff and several inmates while incarcerated at this facility, claiming that the sexual abuse began when she was 13. In November 1973, at age 16, she was transferred to a secure wing at HM Prison Styal in Cheshire. Reportedly, Bell resented her transfer to this facility, and while incarcerated, she unsuccessfully applied for parole. In June 1976, she was transferred to Moore Court Open Prison, where she undertook a secretarial course. 15 months later, in November 1977, Bell again made national headlines when she and another inmate, Annette Priest, escaped from this open prison. Both girls spent several days in the company of 2 young men in Blackpool, visiting the amusements and sleeping in various local hotels, where Bell used the alias Mary Robinson after the 2 parted company. Bell was arrested at the Derbyshire home of one of the men on September 13th, having dyed her hair blonde to disguise her identity. She was returned to custody that evening. Priest was arrested in Leeds days later. Bell's penalty for escaping was a loss of prison privileges for 28 days. In June 1979, the Home Office announced their decision to transfer Mary Bell to HM Prison Ascombe Grange, an open category prison in the village of Ascombe Richard, in efforts to prepare her for her eventual release into society, which was planned for the following year. Beginning in November 1979, Bell worked first as a secretary, then as a waitress at a cafe in York Minster under supervision guidelines in efforts to prepare her for eventual release. Bell was released from prison in May 1980 at the age of 23. Having served almost 11 and a half years in custody. You murder 2 children and you serve 11 years in prison. She murdered 2 children and served 11 years in prison. She was granted anonymity, including a new name, allowing her to start a new life elsewhere in the country under an assumed identity. Upon her release, a spokesman was quoted as saying, "She wishes to be given a chance to live a normal life and to be left alone." I bet those 2 young boys wanted the same thing. 4 years after her release from custody on May 25th, 1984, Bell gave birth to a daughter. Her daughter knew nothing about her mother's past until 1998, when reporters discovered Bell's current location in a resort town on the Sussex coast, where both had been living for 18 months. The media revelation forced Bell and her 14-year-old daughter to leave their home and be driven to a safe house by undercover officers. Both mother and daughter later relocated to another part of the UK. The right to anonymity granted to Bell's daughter following her birth was originally only extended until she had reached 18. However, on May 21st, 2003, Bell won a high court battle to have her own anonymity and that of her daughter extended for life. This order was approved by Dame Elizabeth Butler Sloss and was later updated to include Bell's granddaughter. The order also prohibits the divulging of any aspects of their lives that may identify them. That doesn't make any sense. You get to live your life in Oh, you killed two boys. You killed two young boys. What in the? Oh my God. In 1998, Bell collaborated with author Gitta Sereni to provide an account of her life before and after her crimes in Sereni's 1998 book, Cries Unheard, the story of Mary Bell. Within this book, Bell details the abuse she suffered as a child at the hands of her prostitute mother, and she alleges several of her mother's clients. Others interviewed are relatives, friends, and professionals who knew her before, during, and after her imprisonment. Bell's current whereabouts are unknown and remain protected by the 2003 High Court order. According to Sereni, Bell does not claim she was wrongly convicted and freely admits the abuse she suffered as a child does not excuse her crimes. Well, duh, but I just find it crazy how you only serve 11 years in jail for killing two young boys. Like, you murdered them and mutilated them. I don't like, how are you this devious at 10? Like, what did she really go through that she's that devious and that evil at 10 years old? Like, just think about how corrupted the life has to be for you to be thinking about murdering people at 10 years old, to be killing children at 10 years old. And the fact that she recruited an older girl who had intellectual disabilities to follow her and do whatever she said shows that she was way smarter than her age. And this is just insane how, like, she gets to live in anonymity, her daughter gets to live in anonymity, her granddaughter gets to live in anonymity, all because she killed two boys. Like, think about how crazy that is. She got out and she still can live her whole entire life. She gets to live her whole entire life and nobody can say anything. Like, what? That should be put on a registry. Man, if that was in America, you would be put on a registry immediately. Like, violent offender registry, something like that. But that whole story just intrigues the crap out of me, like, in a weird way, because it's like, how are you that demented at 10 years old? I mean, I can see how she grew up in that environment, but would that really lead her to want to kill? You know what I mean? Like, I see you might have been a bully and might have been fighting people, but that's a whole nother line. And the fact that, like, you didn't just do that, like, you displayed, like, you were cutting up the body and stabbing them with scissors. Like, what type of craziness have you seen? Like, that's the wild part about this. But thanks to everyone who watches my videos on this channel. I appreciate y'all. Please be safe. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this. Hit that subscribe button if you're new as well. But I'm out. Peace.